Oh, hey. Well, we're live right away
All right, no problem. No
because
countdown.
Tony knows the magic and I must not. So there was no countdown at all, and we are just right into it. So Sheila, thank you so much for joining our SaaS founder show. We've had some amazing founders, and I'm excited to hear about your story today and how you're growing TeamSense.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So, just to start out, can you tell us a little bit about TeamSense and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So TeamSense is a digital communications platform geared for hourly workers. We do really well, specifically in the manufacturing, construction, warehousing, and logistics space. There's some unique attributes that we can get into about those workers. But the secret sauce to TeamSense is that we do all of this integration and connection with their workers without an app. So a lot of times these workers do not have a corporate email address, they do not have a company phone. And because of that, they're often, left out in the dark from corporate communications. And so we actually got started during COVID, and we're like, our first go-to-market was on COVID, and we can jump into that. And just helping these workers like get back into work safely. And so TeamSense has then expanded beyond, just helping companies with the COVID applications into a variety of other use cases utilizing the same technology.
Wow. So, can you talk about that origin? It sounds like it's pretty recent, but the origin story of how how did you get here?
Yeah, it's been crazy. So I'll talk a little bit about my background and kind of weave that in. And so, I grew up in large corporations. I had spent, when I first came out, I was an engineer. I worked at General Motors. My job was to basically go into factories and bring all of the equipment that it requires to produce the new models into the factory and get that up and running. So I spent lots of time on the factory floor and understanding, the operations there, especially related to the workers and like both, the maintenance teams, as well as what, required for the workers on the line themselves. And I quickly pivoted out of that role and decided that as much as I wanted to be an engineer and build things, like I wanted to be part of the vision on how to build things. And so I decided to go back and get my MBA and focus on like entrepreneurship and marketing. And so I did start a business when I was in business school. I won a business plan competition, like got funded, and didn't work out for a couple of reasons. One is like that aha moment of like at some point I need to pay back my student loans, and like the loan company is not going to take some early equity in my company as payment. And so I then got this idea of like, hey, I've got a lot of bandwidth, like I can do everything. I took a job at Whirlpool Corporation, which is just north of where I was living. So it's about an hour drive. And I decided that I would like continue to run the business and work at Whirlpool like all at the same time. Like you can do this. Well, turns out you can't. There's only so many hours in the day. And as I've learned now and relearned so many times is that, just like dedicating yourself to your career in order to advance. And so I made the tough decision to close that business and really focus on, Whirlpool and my career there.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about what that was?
Yeah, so this was back in 2007, 2008. And so some things have kind of changed since then. But basically, I learned of the fact that, and this is still the case to some extent, although they're better, is that like hospital systems in the United States, they utilize surgical kits when somebody goes into a surgery. Like, so say you have an appendectomy, the doctor grabs like an appendectomy kit, and during surgery, they open this thing up, and inside there's like multiples of everything that you might need during the actual surgery. And so the result is they only use like 20 to 30% of the actual kit. And so you still have, like say sutures, for example, there might be 5 different types of sutures in the kit on the ready, but the doctor only needs one. And so at the time, what was happening was the United States and hospitals in general were just throwing that kit out because it was too expensive to make sure that it was sanitized, and there was a insurance risk. Plus, the insurance companies like already paid for it 100%, and so there's really no incentive to really keep that around. And so what our company did was we basically collected all of those pieces of medical consumables. We brought them into a big warehouse. We sorted them in more generic terms. So instead of like sutures A, B, C, and D, we just said sutures. And then we looked to like resell those to like second and third tier countries abroad because, people in other countries were taking like gauze and rinsing and reusing it just because they don't have access to the supplies.
Yeah.
And so we set up the business to do that. The problem was that, I wasn't as keen on supply chain and, in order to make it work, like you can't just send a single box, right? Like there's no efficiency in sending a single box. So then you had to send basically an entire sea container for the business model to work. But an entire sea container, even at drastically reduced prices, ate up nearly like 100% of the budget of these individual hospitals in these countries because a lot of them are not networked like they are in the US. And so then you're like a new company, you're selling this stuff at a discount. The people on the other side are like, am I really going to spend like 99% of my budget with you? Like, I get that, like, you got this online thing that's showing me the inventory, but like, the really. And so it was just so hard to like close that transaction and build that trust up from nothing. And so it was just really hard from a cash flow perspective, despite the fact that we, acquired the goods that we were selling for free. And so the irony of the whole situation is that I ended up deciding to close the business. And then it was literally like not even 6 months. I think it was just a matter of weeks after I closed the business, the Haiti earthquake happened. And what dawned on me was all of these people, especially at like local groups and church groups, were like, hey, we want to donate and we want to send medical supplies down to Haiti. Like, can you help? And at that point, I had already like offloaded all of the stuff to another, we'll say medical group that was doing missions in Africa, and I had no supplies. And so it's like, oh man, talk about being caught in a bad situation, right? Like now all of a sudden it like dawned on me, was like, oh, like I've been trying to get the money from abroad to pay for it, where there could have been a market to get folks here to sponsor it, right? So like all of these, like if you're a church group and you want to help, like you don't know where to start on how to get medical supplies and how to get them to where you needed to go. But at that point, it was already too late, and we didn't have any supplies to be able to send. And so
it's such a shift in business model, donation, having to deal with that side, fundraising, if you will.
Yeah, and I set it up as for profit for sure. And there was a lot of like, oh, you could do like triple bottom line because it's socially good and stuff like that. And so we did think long and hard about it. But then afterwards, like, I wonder if I made the right decision. But I mean, hindsight's 20/20, right?
Yep.
And so
you're now at Whirlpool, and
I'm at Whirlpool, and I joined in sales, and so I had an opportunity to start with one of their smaller brands. So they have a variety. If people don't know, like Whirlpool owns Whirlpool, KitchenAid, Maytag, Amana, Genair, and so they have a whole suite of brands, which actually, is, if I think about like where I was really kind of formed as a leader and as like a product. We'll say a product creator, for lack of a better term, it was really at Whirlpool. And I joined in sales, but quickly like joined a rotational program. And, kind of two things that really stick out from my time at Whirlpool. The first is, when you're creating products, like one of my roles was I was in charge of dishwashers, right? And so if you think about dishwashers, your opening price point of dishwashers is like $299 on the Amana brand. And your highest price point in dishwashers is like a Genair dishwasher that sells for like $3,200, right? And so the dishwasher itself performs the same exact function, regardless of whether it's an Amana or whether it's a Genair. And so as the leader of the product organization, like you really need to understand your customers. You really need to understand customer segmentation. You really need to understand like what's driving the customers to choose, first and foremost, one brand or another. But then once you get into a brand, like if you think about the product steps, so like, you have your entry-level KitchenAid dishwasher. And so how do you convince that consumer that came in at the entry level to then like buy the next level up, right? And so in that microcosm where you have just minor details among the customers, like you have to pay really close attention and you have to understand your customers really, really well. And so I think that trained me, as a product and in really understanding the customers, that was then able to leverage, throughout my career and what we do at TeamSense every day.
And just to, interject just a tiny bit, because
Please.
I think our audience that's like really important, is understanding the customer. Were there any like kind of light bulb moments of, this is how we do it, or this is what's really impactful in, trying to understand customers?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because I would say my perception of that exact thing has changed over time, like as I've grown as a leader, right? So I would say at Whirlpool, you're making these decisions. You have to make the decisions, at least 18 months out if you're running a really fast program. And so, and a lot of these decisions are like high dollar value, like you're putting in tons of capital into the factory. You have to update the factory in order to produce the new item. And so their level of risk of you being wrong is very, very high, right? And so, when you're conducting your consumer research, you're doing it with a high degree of certainty, right? And so you're looking at, by metro area, have you covered the United States, by demographics, by all sorts of different metrics to make sure that like what you believe is to be true. And there's a variety of ways that you can kind of up your research kind of to ensure that. So you start off very like low fidelity, low cost, and then you slowly, increase the fidelity as you get more sure until eventually,
Right.
like we were showing these products that like look like they worked, right? Like they had the finish, the same exact, like they felt like they could take this thing home and plug it in and like this thing will work, like all the way up to that level of fidelity over time, right? Once you get more and more confident in like what you're bringing to the market.
Yeah.
And so I used to always think that like you needed to have that level of certainty. But then after I left Whirlpool and went to Fortive and Fluke, where I had a much smaller business and a much smaller or a much higher risk tolerance. Like the decision I was making was not going to, be that much capital investment or be that risk level for the company. Then that kind of changed in my mind. It was like, oh man, like I guess we don't really need like a nationally representative population. Like, so what is the right amount? And like, I think it's gone even further. So like when I was at Fluke, it went from like national representative, thousands of folks involved down to like, hey, maybe we talk to like 30 folks down to like TeamSense. I'm like, okay, we get 10 customers on the line. If they're all raving about it, like we go, like we don't have time to waste. And so it's funny, just my own like personal understanding of like how accurate do you need to be, but also, obviously taking into account like what's at stake. Like TeamSense is a new brand, like, we're building the brand and I care a ton about our brand, but at the same time, it's not like, one of Whirlpool's brands where it's a couple $2 billion that you've got on the line if you're to make a mistake, right? And so it's just a matter of scale, but yeah, it's been super helpful.
Yeah, and I find that interesting of like statistical confidence, and how many people do you need to gain that? And maybe it's, is it based when you're a startup on, you just need a small number to have some statistical confidence, but as you get into those $1 billion organizations, that changes a little bit.
Yeah, there's just more at risk, right? And so it's understandable, but it definitely took me a little while to like get my head wrapped around that and like be comfortable with it. I think it's easier on both ends, right? So like at Whirlpool, it's easier to say like, okay, I need to have really high confidence because this decision, could impact the company in a we'll say a really large factor, versus like Fluke is kind of in the middle. And that one is the hardest, right? Because you're like, we're like TeamSense is on the other spectrum. So if you're on either side, like I think it's fairly straightforward, but it's in the middle ground, which is huge, of like, okay, what is really right? And I think that really depends also on the folks that you're working with, 100%. Who you're reporting to, who's the decision makers, and really understanding what they need in order to feel confident about the decision.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so you were at Fluke, Fortive, and so now we're almost getting back to the origin story of TeamSense.
I know, right?
That come together.
Yeah, so I had left Whirlpool after 11 years there. And there's some like various reasons. The main one was like I really, really wanted to run like a full business, like full P&L. And the way Whirlpool was set up financially, like that doesn't really happen until you're really high up and you've like got $18 billion worth of business. And I was like, okay, like my career projection and what I think I want and the timing of when that could possibly happen at Whirlpool was just not in line. And so I made the decision to jump over to Fluke, which I don't know if you know, Fluke is a test and measurement company. It's owned by Fortive Corporation. And so I made the decision to join Fluke, in which I ran their industrial imaging business segment. So kind of top to bottom, I launched the new II-900, which is an acoustic imager, which was fun. It was a new to the world technology that could do really cool things on, finding air leaks in factories, which is it's actually really, really wasteful. And this tool kind of like revolutionized the way that you do that. And so that was a ton of fun. And then I also had the thermography business. So all of your, asset management with heat sensing cameras and things like that.
Okay.
And so I joined them for about a year and led that business. We had to do a little bit of a turnaround because of some supply chain issues, and there's not too many thermal suppliers in the world. And so led that turnaround and bringing kind of all the new supply chain in. And then after about a year, Fortive decided that they were going to figure out, and like typically how Fortive grows, if I back up, they're like an industrial conglomerate. They look at, various technologies and they make acquisitions. And so Fortive has been, buying various acquisitions throughout the years, and that's how they've generally grown. They do a little bit of organic growth, but mostly inorganic. And so, the CEO and kind of the leadership team is looking at the markets right now, and with SPACs and everything else, like some of the multiples for, just buying companies are crazy. And so like, okay, is this really sustainable for us as a long-term business? In some cases, yes, but at the same time, they thought that they needed to diversify. And so they're like, we should think about doing a startup ourselves. And what's so fun about the Fortive leadership team is they're really humble. They're like, I've never done a startup as a Fortune 500 CEO and Fortune 500 leadership team. And so what they did is they actually sought out Pioneer Square Labs, which is a Seattle like startup studio and venture firm. And so they inked a deal with them to, create startups and do a studio together with Fortive. And so then Fortive looked around and said, hey, we need somebody to come and like join the studio and like build the first company. And so they tapped me and this other person, Allison Reuting, who's amazing, on the shoulder and said, hey, will you guys go and like go figure out a company that you can build that would sort of fit into, the longer term Fortive strategy.
What an opportunity. We were plucked. I think that sounds like such an opportunity, and so many folks are probably a little bit jealous of that.
Yeah, it's really nice because it kind of itched my need to like want to be an entrepreneur. Like I had that experience. I'd done some innovation at Whirlpool, like new to the world products in that time there. And at the same time, like where I was in my career, like I wasn't ready for that full on risk. Like I'm the sole like income earner for my family. I've got 2 small kids and all of those like life things that happen. And so I was like, this is like, I couldn't write a better job description to go and do this. And so I was like, yeah, absolutely. And they're like, we don't know what we're doing. So like, you're going to have to help figure it out. And I'm like, okay, like what better place to go than, with folks that are just willing to learn and willing to experiment and continuous improve. And so we went into it in basically like April of 2020. So obviously April of 2020 was right as all of the lockdowns were happening.
Right.
And so, we have, and Fortive has a focus on, manufacturing workers and manufacturing technology. And so with my background, and even when I was at Whirlpool and producing the new products, like you have to interface with manufacturing because you actually have to build what you spec out, right? And so I had a lot of experience in manufacturing. And we quickly understood that, one is these folks have to get back to work, right? They'll be deemed essential and they have to be safe. But it also represents like this incredible market opportunity, right? There's a solution that everybody knows that they need, and there's zero incumbents, right? And like everybody in the world is looking for a solution for this, and it's just like an all-out foot race. And so we basically pitched that we could run faster and smarter, more so than smarter than, Google and Amazon, Microsoft, all these other folks that had already started down the path of like COVID contact tracing. And what was interesting is we knew all along that this was going to be something that we'd have to pivot off of, right? And so we knew that like this would be an expiring go-to-market strategy. Right. But at the same time, pitch this opportunity of like, hey, I believe that the way that these workers work every day and the way that they get communications from the company, the way they interact with their managers is going to be disrupted forever, right? Like think about how they do training. Like they jam all these people into like a little training cell in manufacturing. Is that going to be okay? Like, when are people going to feel comfortable like jamming, 50 people into a tiny room to go through their, annual OSHA training? Or like, way do they communicate? They do these daily stand-ups where everybody stands around the board and they look at, what's going on with the factory, across all of their different KPIs and elements. And so if you thought about like, okay, how are they working today? Like, that's not going to be okay in the future. And so we basically pitched like, we can go to market with a COVID screening tool that's not app-based, because we firmly believe that these folks are not going to accept an app, especially one that they believe is tracking them. So we go to market with a COVID symptom tool. And then over time, we pivot it to meet these other use cases around communication and connecting this workforce and digitizing this workforce, all without an app. And so the Fortive team was like, they gave us the money and they're like, all right, like, let's go. Like, we're going to give this a shot. And,
and I do just want to, one thing I want to point out, and I had this conversation with a past founder, was like, chaos and kind of disruption drive innovation. And although people, we're really worried about COVID and how it can affect people and jobs, I think you're an example, like other founders that we've had, of how innovations can come out of it and create new opportunities.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think anytime there's a huge disruption, there's just a ton of opportunity that goes with it. And so, yeah, we were able to capitalize on that. And I don't know, like we formed the company May 15th is when we got the investment. By June 1st, we had signed our first customer and had like a basic MVP. We started getting revenue June 30th. And so I don't know, with Pioneer Square Labs, they always joke, they're like, you guys were like the fastest out of the gate to revenue that we've had. And like the fun part about, if I back up a little bit on the studio model, so like TeamSense was, and I'll get there eventually, was a separate entity. So like Fortive was an investor in TeamSense. We were a separate company, registered in the state of Delaware, all of that stuff. So it wasn't like, we were starting it within the Fortune 500 at all. We were just, a startup that they had invested in. Right. And then as of a couple of weeks ago, they actually acquired us. And so we have since been acquired, and now we're actually part of Fortive 100%. So we could eventually get there if your users or listeners are interested in that.
Well, something that you mentioned, and I maybe want to unpack now, or maybe it makes sense a little bit later, but the speed. Talking about May 15th to revenue June 30th, I think everybody struggles with that. So what can you tell me how or why or what you think drove that?
Yeah, I mean, the market, we knew it was like on a time constraint, right? So like time is of the essence and speed is so important. And so we kind of leaned in a bit on like our marketing messaging. The other thing is that's really unique is that like, because we were a COVID symptom tracking tool, Google had also locked down, like you couldn't buy Google AdWords. Like there's no way you're going to rank an SEO on COVID terms at that point. And so like our only avenue was LinkedIn. And so we had some, targeted advertisements. So we started off really targeted. We knew that we're going after manufacturing. I knew that those folks don't accept apps as readily as other types of hourly workers. So like food service, hospitality tend to be a little bit younger. And so they're more open to having company-sponsored apps on their phone, where manufacturing workers tend to be older and they're not okay. And so we had this kind of unique knowledge that we just decided to leverage and exploit. And so we went to market with this kind of no app approach. And then we were super targeted in our LinkedIn advertisements, and we'd get somebody on the phone and ask them, right? Like, hey, this is what we've got. And like, meanwhile, the engineers in the back, like putting all the pipes together. And then what we did was really so just something like similar to what I picked up kind of at Whirlpool was when we got our first customer on board, we're like, hey, like we'd love to hear how it's going and get your feedback. And we set up a weekly meeting with them for 30 minutes. And so every week we'd get on the phone, we'd say, how's it going? What do you like? What do you not like? And then we got our second customer and we set them up with 30 minutes. And we got our third customer, we set them up for 30 minutes. And so over time, like our product team is talking to our customers every week, for 30 minutes. And still to this day, like we still talk to a lot of our customers, either because they're super innovative, right? So if we find somebody that is a smaller company. We'll say it's not that much like from a financial perspective, but like their people are super innovative and bleeding edge. Like you bet we're going to be on the phone with them weekly. Or if the customer is really important and we want to build the relationship, so we've got some, enterprise level customers, then we'll get them on the phone just from a engagement standpoint. And so what we found is, as you're building the product, like obviously the things that they ask for are things that are applicable to everyone. And so we were able to really leapfrog and keep kind of pushing the envelope of what they needed to be successful really quickly, because they're on the phone, like telling us, right? Like, hey, like this part of your product, like really sucks. Like it would be awesome if you could, do X, Y, or Z. And then I literally get off the phone. I'm like, hey, engineers, like we need to do X, Y, and Z. And the next week they're like, oh my God, like you delivered what I wanted. Awesome. And it's almost magical because a lot of these folks don't get that opportunity. Like a lot of times, these manufacturing companies are with these big software, like you think about like SAP and, Oracle, like they don't get that type of attention. And so it was this awesome flywheel where they're like, they love feeling like they're part of the product. We love their feedback, and we just kind of grew really quickly and then had a really nice, robust product pretty quickly after first customer.
And I've heard that trend, and I love it, is the idea, I think successful founders I've talked to have a level of intimacy with their clients, especially in the early stages, where they really have a tight feedback loop. And so, for other founders that are out there, I think that's just a key component is, you could put an MVP out to the market, but if you're not having that intimacy or that tight feedback loop, you're probably losing out on a lot of opportunity or ability to pivot in the right direction.
For sure. I think that is by far and away the key to our success. I would say, even if you like advance forward and say, okay, like what was the next thing that you guys came out with right after COVID? We came out with this like attendance program. So like right now, if somebody has to call off sick at a factory, they call this like 1-800 number. They leave a long-winded message of like, hey, like my kid is kind of sick and I don't know if I want to send them in. And then that message sometimes goes into like a bank where all the managers need to listen to every single message and like figure out which one is their employees. If they're lucky, it gets sent to like
pretty dated.
It's terrible, right? Like if they're lucky, it gets sent to their desk, but they still like already have the negative impact, which is they've already got the line up and running and had to deal with the absent person that just didn't show.
Yeah.
By the time they get back to their desk to listen to the message. And then once you listen to the message, then you're like, okay, was that Sheila? Was that Shelly? I couldn't hear. There was noise in the background. Like, do I code this as, this form of absence or that form of absence? And so like TeamSense itself from a system perspective is really like a branching survey, right? And so once you get to the branching survey, you can then get to like different endpoints. And so the endpoints that we have now are all related to like the absences for that particular use case. And so, you ask them like, is this for a future absence or a current absence? Like, okay, it's a current absence. Great. Like which one, and you keep like, depending on the absence policy of the company, you can basically just keep winnowing down into a single status. And then immediately, as soon as they hit send, you send a text message to the manager that says, hey, Sheila's not going to be in today. I also send it to the email address so that they can take care of whatever they need to on the line immediately. And then they know that when they come back to their desk, that they can then, open up and read the details and kind of do what they need to do in the payroll system to get that rolling. And so the funny part is it's like, it kind of meshes really well with COVID, right? Because with COVID, when they go into alert status, generally they need to be out for 10 to 14 days, depending on the various quarantine rules. And so like, that's like their attendance. And so like, you need to tell the managers, that they're going to be out. And so our own customers were like, hey, like we're already kind of using this as like a supplement to the attendance. Like it would be awesome if like we could have other like attendance statuses, like, somebody's car broke down. It would be great to understand that they're going to be arriving late, or somebody has a sick, not COVID sick, incidents. Like, can you help us with that? And so then we started floating that around our other customers and on our sales calls and really, realized and kind of validated that idea. Like, wow, this attendance thing, and like learned about that voicemail process. You're like, this is terrible. Welcome to the 21st century. And so we launched that, and that has been a huge success for us and really helped us kind of continue that momentum.
And you can really hear in that story how it goes from like the this micro piece that now I hear communications app that really solves a big challenge of where people don't want apps. And I can see it, really has come clear, which is amazing. And like you said, that problem of it goes into a general voicemail. With technology, the phone number and can route it in the right place.
We know exactly who they are, who the manager is. Some other things. So of course, now we've got everybody's contact information, which is not a given in these manufacturing settings, right? Like they go into HR when they're hired. And then this population tends to turn phone numbers a lot more frequently than I would say the average population. And so over time, they don't have the most updated contact information. And so one of the things that they asked us to do was hey, you've got everyone's contact information. You can send out messages. I would love a mass messaging and communication tool. And so we're oh yeah, we can do that. And so then, we immediately sent out a mass notification tool, which has been used for a variety of things. It's fun to see the different use cases. And so of course you can imagine the factory is closed. We've had snowstorms, tornado warnings, and things like that kind of go out on our messaging system. But we've also seen some interesting ones where some folks are using it for engagement, right? So somebody sent out messages around National Pet Day, and they're hey, today's National Pet Day. Tell your coworker about your four-legged friend, and started to use it from an engagement standpoint. Yeah. The other use case that we see it is from a safety standpoint. So, a lot of these companies are all about safety naturally. And so they'll have their EH&S manager come in and they'll send out, and you could schedule messages to go out in our system. And so what they'll do is they'll log in on Monday morning and they'll schedule messages to go out for first shift, second shift, third shift at an appropriate time with a safety tip of the day, right? And they'll have it's fork truck safety week. And so day one is be sure to use the mirrors as you're going through the cross, right? Day two is a fork truck can't see you if you're within, 2 feet, et cetera, et cetera. And so now they're starting to use it for safety tips. And so we've started to branch out, and now they're coming back to us and oh, it'd be amazing. Can we use your system for mark yourself safe for, a fire evac situation because we've got so many buildings and our teams are constantly traveling between buildings? Or can we use your system to, do our safety checks on our fire extinguishers? Just have them go through I'm at fire extinguisher 1, yes, yes, yes. And so the use cases just keep coming, which has been a ton of fun. And now our hardest problem is okay, these are all great ideas. All of our customers love these ideas. Which ones do we do next, and what order do we put them in? I was going to
interrupt and ask you about that because that's a common trend on our show. Is you get ideas from everywhere, mentors and customers, family and friends. How have you managed all of those ideas coming in and evaluated whether those go into a roadmap?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think there's a couple of different things. One is what value are you actually providing to the customer, and can that be quantifiable? And so if it's something that's a little bit softer, then it goes a little bit further out on the roadmap, right? Because it's okay, I need to sell this and we need to continue to grow. And so if I can't easily point to the value that I'm providing to the customer, then great idea, maybe we can do it, but not right now. The other is really ease of implementation. And so how much effort on our side is it to implement it? And I'll tell you a funny story, if you think about where we were from a product, we knew we were going kind of in this direction from day one, but speed was so important that we took on some tech debt, right? Of how did we do our surveys? And we started off, which this is crazy. And I think about it, I'm oh, why did we do this? But we started off putting people into groups of when the surveys would go out. So our surveys would send out automatically every morning. And so we started off putting them into you're the 8 a.m. group, or you're the 5:45 group, or you're the whatever. And then we started getting more and more time zones. So then it got even more complex. And then those groups then spanned multiple companies of we can put them in that group because that's when their surveys go out. And so eventually that became unsustainable, right? You're that's not right. Every individual should have their own time. So we had a revamp for that. The other big revamp we had was, with COVID, you kind of ended up in two statuses. You were sick or not sick. And so our entire system was kind of predicated on this idea of the sick or not sick. But then when we started doing the attendance, you're still sick, but you're not COVID sick, right? And so being able to kind of expand those endpoints took another revamp of the way that our surveys are kind of formatted and treated in the database. That was an interesting ride, to say the least.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you've been doing this for over a year now, right?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what you think has been the biggest challenge that you've kind of had to overcome through this journey so far.
Yeah, it's kind of a mix, right? So I think hiring in this market, like right now, is so hard. And like we are really particular with our hiring. Like we have a very diverse team. We're committed to diversity, and we're committed specifically to diversity in tech. And so we have a really high bar on what we're holding ourselves accountable to, especially being founded in 2020, right? And so there's no excuses for us not to get this right. And so hiring has been incredibly difficult and just growing at the rate that we need to grow. I think the other thing is really like when to take on and like when to tackle that tech debt. So like one of the things we're working on right now, and we've got nearly all hands on deck from a dev side, is we're working on integrations, right? So like from an HR standpoint, you figure if I go back to that attendance product, once that attendance status comes out and you say like, okay, they're going to take this, PTO, there's then right now, like we hand that off to the manager and say, hey, we took over that step to understand what they're going to do and who they are and give you that information in advance. But they still have a step right now where they have to go and put that into their payroll system. And so they have to say, okay, Sheila is going to take PTO, and then the payroll system, kind of modifies the bank. And so right now we're focusing on connecting to, the big companies that everybody knows, like Ceridian and Kronos and ADP and Paylocity and all those guys, so that like that can happen automatically. But from a company standpoint, we're at a tough spot in that like that doesn't add that much incremental value. Like for sure, It helps us like close the enterprise sales, but it's not a new feature, right? It's like it's a little bit, but it's so important for those enterprise sales that we're like, all right, like we got to bite the bullet right now and like get these integrations done. So then like that can help kind of like we're going to go slow to go fast, kind of on the growth perspective. And so knowing when to take those big kind of steps of like, we're not going to deliver new features to our end users for a matter of weeks because, we're focused on this other stuff, I think has been the hardest decision and like when to do that from a company growth standpoint.
Yeah. And I've heard with integration specifically, just talking to a lot of software founders of, how do you do it in making those decisions of who do you integrate with? Because it's become such a complex space.
Yeah.
So have you had that challenge too of, how do we make these decisions about what we do and how we do it from an integration standpoint?
We have, and I think, we look to our customers, right? Like thankfully our customers have a fairly limited number of set that we could choose from. And so from there, it's like, okay, there's like 3 or 4 that we just have to do. I think the complexity is like the integrations on the other side. So like if you take Kronos, for example, like a lot of our customers are like, hey, we use Kronos. Okay, great. So you like look into Kronos. Well, Kronos has grown by acquisition and they've never done the work on their back end to like make that all the same. So they have different products of Kronos that are all labeled Kronos. You've got Altipro and Dimensions and all these other ones. And so in reality, an integration with us for Kronos is really like probably like 30, right? And so it's more of like the nuances within that's frustrating from our end. Like Kronos doesn't care about us, but at the same time, like trying to make and do the right decision for our customers.
So I'd love to talk about people because you touched on that, the challenge of hiring, but just generally people and some topics around that. What was the team as you started? Obviously, you mentioned, I think there was a co-founder, right? Or someone else that was with you. So how did it start and how has your team evolved over this period of time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we started off like the 2 of us that came out of Fortive and jumped into the studio. Were myself and Allison Roy-Ting. Allison is an incredible leader, really young, but so talented. And so she heads up our product. And then our first hire was our CTO. We hired Jeremy Watsack. And so what's unique about Jeremy is, I was really looking for somebody that was in many ways opposite of what I am, right? So it took a lot of self-reflection and introspection to say like, okay, like what are my worst qualities and how do I hire for somebody that's the exact opposite to make sure that like the 2 of us just don't like continue to amp up one another and we end up making really bad decisions. So if I think about like my worst quality in some respects, from running a company, I like to make decisions fast, right? And so I can tend to like be like, oh, this is the decision, let's go, like we need to move. And so I was looking for somebody that like it was a lot more considered in their decision making specifically. And so we found that in Jeremy. And I think about like the way that we hire is I'm constantly looking, one, for diversity of thought, diversity of experience. Our team, has a ton of different, like both professional experience, but as well as like life experience that helps. And it helps us relate to our customer base as well. And so if we think about every new hire, especially in the early stage, like we're almost like plotting them on a scale of like, where do you come in on a variety of factors, right? So like, are you like overly, like overly demanding? Are you, somebody that's more soft? Are you like, and like we're constantly trying to get the team to be on either side of this kind of middle, such that the team doesn't move one way or the other, and we end up having to kind of counter correct the culture. And so, I view every new hire as like a little, piece that needs to fit, and it's hard because I can't hire the next person until that person is in, right? Like I don't know that exact puzzle piece of who we're looking for from a culture perspective, because it matters, until we get to the next piece, because diversity is so important. There isn't just like one single mold of like, oh, you're a TeamSense person. And so I think we put that on ourselves, but man, has it been worth it? Like we've avoided so many disasters just because of like the team that we've built and, the diversity of their experience. Like we've got folks that have spent a long time in their career as an hourly worker, right? And so like that's really helpful when you're trying to build for these folks. And so, I think our process is pretty robust, but in my opinion needs to be. There's not anything more important to our job than how do we grow this team and grow it in the right way.
Is there anything that you do to like manage the culture? Because the thing that came to my mind, the puzzle pieces make sense, but everybody's complex, and there's all these things that are at the surface and under the surface. Have you had any issues where those people that you feel like complement end up not complementing each other? And then, as you learn these things, how do you manage or, work around building the culture of the company?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we have had that. We've had a couple folks that came in and, they just, like our team moves fast. Like we run a weekly sprint, which most software companies are running like a 2-week sprint. And so we're moving really quickly because we're taking that feedback from our customers and directly inputting it, back. And it also goes to the weekly meetings that we had with the customers, right? And so we're kind of built that way. And some folks just can't keep up, and it can get overwhelming, or they're coming from, corporate where you're not in startup mode, where like we need to run because it's a matter of survival. And so we've had a little bit of that. So to mitigate that, we've actually invited, potential new hires to our sprint planning. Like, hey, come see what the team has delivered in the last week and what we're going to plan to deliver in the next week. And then like, let me know, like, do you feel this works for you, right? So we've invited folks to sprint planning. We've done a ton, and this is something that we do standard now, is we do either a homework assignment or a working session for the functional area, right? And so we've got, for instance, we're hiring a customer success engineer right now. And sometimes our customers give us, data uploads that have all kinds of data errors in them, right? And so the team created a fake set of data that has a bunch of different errors in it. And we send it out and we say, okay, spend 20 minutes on this, send it back. Let's see what you can do. And we look for those errors just to see like real life, like this is a real life problem that we have, like similar with marketing, we'll pull kind of our ad spend. Like, this is what we're seeing. Like, here's the different groups. These are the different targets. Like, how would you do this differently? Right. Yeah. And so we found it super, super helpful where, you're starting, when you're talking about candidates, you're starting to get down to like the data and the nitty gritty of like, can they do the job or not? As opposed to like, hey, do I like them or do I like them not? I think the second thing is like, okay, like, yes, they can do the job. Then, are they going to impact the team in a positive way or in a negative way? And in some cases, we might say like, hey, the team is getting a little bit like lax. Like we need somebody to come in that's just like a little bit further to the side that's like going to push them like, hey guys, we need to run. Or maybe it's the opposite. Like the team has been running like crazy, and we need somebody that's going to pull them back a little bit so that we don't burn our team out in 6 months. And so I think once we figure out that they can do the job, then, we start getting into like where they fit on kind of the spectrum and whether that's the right move for us culturally.
I'm a big believer in, developing a clear vision and mission. And we actually use our core values to really evaluate and, decide on the right people. Do you use those types of things, the vision, mission, and other pieces? And how do you use them in your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you learned anything from the discussion today is like how core our customer is to what we do. And so somebody that doesn't have, the ability to have sympathy or empathy for both the hourly workers and the people that manage them are just not for us at all. Somebody that doesn't want to mentor, like I said, like we are fully committed to helping to diversify tech. And so in order to do that, like we have to take risks on, more junior folks or folks that otherwise don't have a tech background that maybe came out of a tech boot camp. That's why we do these homework assignments, right? Like, okay, like, let me see what you can do. Like, if you can do it, like, that's what we're asking for. I don't care if you have a degree in it or not. Like, if you can do the job, then come on. And so like, we do all these different things. And that all kind of further like builds up our values of who we are as a company. I think we have, I'm originally from Buffalo. We talked before it started, Buffalo, New York. And I would call that Midwest, but like, we're very Midwestern values, right? Like even when it relates to our customers, when I'm on a call, like our contracts are month to month. Like we're not adding value to you. You can cancel at any time. No problem. Like you have to earn your keep every month by pushing whatever you're pushing out your factory door. Like I'm going to earn my keep every month and make sure that I'm delivering value. And if you're not happy, then that's fine. We can part ways. And like that's just kind of how we are. We're transparent. We're like very forward and very honest people. Like obviously in our existence, like we've also made mistakes, right? Like we at one point we had a welcome message go out to one of our big customers. They had a factory of just under 1,000 people, and there was an error in our code, and we basically spammed them. We sent like 45 different text messages in the span of like 18 minutes. And so I had to call the headquarters and be like, hey, I made a mistake. Like this was the error. This is, our process on how we find these things. This is what we've changed to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And then say like, I made a mistake. Like I'm going to give you a discount for this month. They didn't ask for it. Like we just did it. And so like, if you don't have those type of values, if you're not concerned about our customer, if you're not there, like understanding what they're going through and how their life is, then you're not for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about you personally? How has your role changed as a founder from, let's say, right before you started to now? Like, what does your day look like comparatively over that time?
Oh, great question. I would say, it's really gone from like surviving day to day to more like, what investments do I need to make today to enable our growth that we need to get, in 3 months and 6 months. And so it's really just the time horizon. Like one of the things, like I mentioned early on, was when we first started, like we couldn't use Google. It was pretty much off the table for anything COVID because you're not going to rank, and they weren't allowing, ads to come in to buy off COVID terms. And so like we were 100% on LinkedIn. Well, since then, like we've moved to Google. And I know that like SEO is going to be really important for us in the long run, but SEO is an investment, right? Like you have to start now, you have to build up your content, you have to, be really, really thoughtful. And like, what are those people looking for? Like, how can I get them the answer and start becoming, a thought leader, like in your space, in their eyes? And so one of the things that we've been investing in lately is a lot of content creation in SEO. Similarly, like looking at our overall marketing spend, right? Like, we were heavy on LinkedIn and now we've got these other channels. So like there's plenty that we can do from a marketing spend, but that's not going to pay out, tomorrow. That's not going to get us the next lead. And so I think I went from 100% focused on like, I need to get the next one in the door. I need to get more revenue and just, managing all the sales, to more saying like, okay, from a user growth standpoint, we're actually sitting pretty good on a month over month growth rate, on a year over year growth rate. Like I've got some ability to really make those investments in the future so that we can continue on that same growth path.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Was there anything, our audience of founders is always looking for, but you mentioned LinkedIn early on, you've talked about SEO and these other things. Was there any like one aspect that was a catalyst for growth, whether it's marketing or a growth hack, but something that really helped, I guess, change the game of acquiring customers?
Yeah, I think we're still kind of reinventing ourselves a bit from the change from COVID to the change into now like this long-term thing, right? So I think the biggest difference that we've seen is just the sense of urgency. Like obviously, like I'd get on the phone with somebody during the time in which they're looking for a symptom screening solution, and like they'd be in the customer database in 48 hours. Where now, where you're like an HR tech, it's more of like a 90-day sales cycle is roughly what we're seeing, and so it just requires different tactics. I would say coming out of corporate, and everybody else will probably laugh, I did feel like a dinosaur, right? Like, I don't know if you guys know, like intent data, like Bombora, like that blew my mind. I was like, wait, what? Like this stuff exists? And so like the ability to use that type of stuff and to use that targeting and like understand intent, like we've been able to get some really great enterprise level customers, leveraging that intent data. We also love Pendo. So we added Pendo to our tech stack. And like, so now that our customer base has grown, like obviously we have touch bases with these folks, like I said, that are super innovative or on the bleeding edge of their kind of field, or if they're super important to us as a company. But then like, how do we get those others and how do we really scale that customer intimacy? And so that's where we're leveraging, tools like Pendo. And so like, we can really understand, like, when they're using it, what features are they using, and then play that back into our sales track a bit. But I would say I'm still, looking, reading, following blogs, like looking for those growth hacks. But I think, I don't know, there's no hack to hard work and time in some cases.
No, it's great. So what's the future look like for the product, for the company, for you? What do you see happening in the next, 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, so great question. I think, obviously we were acquired by Fortive, which is great. So that gives us a really nice, stable financial backing. We fit really, really well with their strategy on moving into more software SaaS business models. And so from that standpoint, I'm super happy that I don't need to spend my time going around and pitching VCs. And so that's great. That gives us a nice stability to work off of. But it's really like continuing to expand this ability to connect this workforce without an app. Like we are 100% committed to no app, but still doing like really cool things. And so we've expanded into engagement surveys. A lot of times, like Towers Watson and these big monster engagement survey companies are all tied to your corporate email address, which these people don't have. And so a lot of times they don't have an engagement survey. So we're doing, engagement surveys, we're doing exit surveys. Coming up on the horizon are, there's a huge labor shortage, which everybody probably knows about. I'm not giving any new news. And so how do we help our customers? One is like attract that talent. So can we make their processes, because again, we're not an app, but they have all these processes in order to hire new folks. Like, can we make those much more streamlined so that company comes off as being, very innovative, very forward thinking, like with our product? And then at the same time, can we help them retain? I know that, a lot of their churn of new employees happens in the first 90 days. And so can we use our tool to help engage and understand and give them kind of these pre-warnings before somebody might churn, where you need to have human intervention? And so lots of cool ideas and lots of ways to use the system. The other unique thing is, again, like this no app thing ends up being so magical, because then they're like, oh, interesting. Like, here's another outdated process on like how my customers submit orders to me is terrible. Like, I make them go through my portal and make them do this. Like, can you automate that for us? And I don't need to ask my vendors to download a special, like, just us app. Like, I can do that through you. And so like they keep coming with these ideas. And so again, we're at that moment of like, okay, like, where's the greatest value for our time right now? And then like, when could we possibly get there, just to continue to expand the footprint?
That's really cool. So before I jump into like a kind of final question, tell people, where can they find you? Where can they learn more? What would be valuable for you from our audience? Yeah,
so I love to connect and network and understand and learn more. So the best way to do it is to reach out on LinkedIn. I don't know if you can put a link to my LinkedIn there. Yeah. And then also if you go to teamsense.com and you hit up contact or hello@TeamSense, that actually still comes to me. So feel free to shoot me a message and we can find time to connect for sure.
That's amazing. So my final question that I ask all of our SaaS founders is, if you could go back in time to right before you started the company and meet with yourself, what advice would you give?
Oh man, great question. I think it would be to have more confidence in myself, right? Like there's so many times where you're like, oh my God, like, are we really going to make payroll? Are we really going to? And like, it works out. And, coming from corporate, I think I had a chip on my shoulder of like, I don't know how to do this startup thing. Like I've been sucked away in corporate for 15 years. Like I said, Bombora blew my mind. And like, that's probably been out for 10 years or something. I don't know. And so I was definitely really unsure of my ability to be a CEO and my ability to drive this team to success. And so, looking back at what we've been able to do, I think, the approach we take is just like one day at a time. Like I'm super honest with my team. I'm like, I've never been a CEO today or before. Like all I'm going to promise you is that like, I'm going to be better today than I was yesterday. And tomorrow I'm going to be better than I was today. And that's kind of the mantra that we take as a team, is just this continuous improvement. And so, I think I would tell myself to like, calm down, have faith, and get to work.
That's great. That's fantastic. I just want to thank you so much. I think we had some amazing, discussion and topics, very helpful for the crew. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure. And thank you so much for having me. This was a ton of fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. And thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you next week, and have a great day.
Have a great day. Take care.